Neck-throughs, guitars, they're like a guy that won't have a beer with you.
I want to hear what's pushing the notes.
Freddie King and B.B. King, Albert King, and let's not forget Burger King.
I don't want to blow my knuckle out.
Stainless steel is the work of the devil.
These go to 11.
From the East Amplification Tone Labs in Baltimore, Maryland, it's the Amps and Axes Show. With your hosts, Jeff the Godfather of Low Wattage Amps Bober and Mick Marcelino.
Well, good day to you, Mr. Bober.
Good day to you, Mr. Marcelino. And it's a good day it is.
It is a good day. It is a good
Right.
day. And, we just want to tell you that we can't do this thing without you. We really love you spreading the word, telling all your friends, tell your other people. Well, you know.
Yes, that's right.
They got to tell
Romans,
everybody.
countrymen, absolutely. Tell people in other, not only your country, but tell people in other countries. Tell people all over the place because we absolutely need it.
Yes.
So please tell everybody you know.
That's right. And when you do, of course, we ask you, because the other podcasts, they get a lot of our guests, by the way.
Yeah, we've seen that happen.
And we've seen that happen a couple times. You want to tell them you heard it here first.
That's right. That's right. And this is a first kind of for us because we're not really interviewing the highlighted person, but a relative of that person, which in a very cool project going on with that person's relative. I know that sounds confusing, but it won't be in a minute. So anyway, we're going to take a pause for the cause, and we're going to come back with the daughter of a phenomenal, unfortunately long ago deceased guitar player, Mr. Lenny Breau. We are going to speak to his daughter and a new movie project that she is working on about his life. So we'll be right back with Miss Emily Hughes.
Hey, this is Dean Pizzazz from the band Wayland, and you're listening to Amps and Axes.
Okay, and we are back as promised because we keep our promises here. And we are back with our guest of the week, a very interesting guest, possibly not a musician herself, but we'll find that out. But daughter of an incredible musician that we lost too early, Mr. Lenny Breau. So we're here with his daughter, Miss Emily Hughes. Emily, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. Nice
Excellent.
to talk to you. Mm-hmm.
Now, Jeff, I always have a story.
Okay.
And I always interrupt right at the beginning.
That's good. And everybody's used to that, so it's cool.
It's only been 237 of them. I'm not going to break stride now. So we got contacted by, I guess, your assistant. Is that am I correct? And it was really weird because I get this email. It was actually through our contact page, and I'm like, well, let me, I didn't know your dad, but the name sounded familiar. So then I go and I research, and I'm like, whoa, there's a story here that's pretty incredible. Yeah. And on top of that, I'm currently in the process of doing a documentary on one of our former past guests, a guy named Phil Oliveri. Now, the story is, it's a whole different story here, but it was interesting. And when I said something to Jeff was like, oh, absolutely, because he is a fan of your dad's work. So, and here we are.
Nice.
So I'm going to let Jeff do what he does all the time.
Okay.
And I'm just going to turn this microphone over to him.
That means we this is going to be a little bit different. Usually we do this with our guest, but a guest daughter is what we have here, and so we usually take our guest for a ride in the Wayback Machine, and find out where our guest was born and raised and how they got into this wonderful, wacky world of music. But we're, I guess we'll go from we have to go from your perspective. So
sure,
we'll find out where you were born and raised and what you remember. And at this point, it's probably a lot because you have done a past documentary and now you're into a new documentary. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's right.
So,
yeah.
All right. So we'll find out like
sure
your part of being born and raised into this family and what you remember and where we go from there, like this whole crazy story. So give us a little history.
Yeah. Well, I was born in Toronto, Canada. I live in Calgary now. And Mom and Lenny performed together. They actually met doing CBC shows. There were some really hip black and white music variety shows coming out of Canada in the 60s. And Mom was a backup singer and Lenny was the lead guitarist in the house band. Pretty sophisticated stuff. And they were both really young. I think Mom was about 19, really in tune, great vocalist. Lenny was in his early 20s, but playing with incredible maturity. And so that's where they actually met in Winnipeg and then moved to Toronto and, where I was born. And then they split up. They reconciled a couple of times throughout my childhood. So I actually have relatively few vivid memories of Lenny. He struggled with his vices, and that was a big part of why he wasn't around more consistently. My mom was sort of sheltering me or protecting me. So depending on how he was doing, he would be around or not. So once I hit about 16, 17, and I started venturing out to hear live music, I grew up with this great education. My mom always listened to, Bill Evans and John Coltrane and, great vocalist. She's a singer. And so once I started, sneaking into clubs to hear live music, and I heard what other guitar players said about my dad, because my mom kind of played him down, She has a balanced perspective. Yeah, like she didn't say anything negative, but she never said, he's considered to be one of the greatest guitar players who ever lived. I never heard any of the superlatives or anything until I started talking to musicians who were hip to him, and they would literally, fall on the floor and say, "Oh my God, your dad is amazing." And so that really piqued my interest, and I had started taking notes. I thought I would get a ghost author and do a biography, and then I realized my writing skills probably aren't strong enough, and I didn't really want to work with anybody else. So I started looking into grants here in Canada at that time, which was in the 90s. There was a lot of first-time filmmaker grants and female filmmaker grants, and so I was able to get co-producers and get enough dough to do a pretty high budget documentary, and it aired on Canadian Bravo, and it did well. There was a lot of prominent players that participated. We had George Benson and Andy Summers from The Police and Pat Metheny and Steve Vai, Chet Atkins, Ted Green. So real diverse. So we had rockers and jazzers and classical players, Leona Boyd. So, and that's rare.
Yeah, I don't want to interrupt, but I do want to back up for a minute. It's when you started sneaking into clubs.
Yeah.
Did you have any?
What about it?
Did you have any reference point?
You cut out for a sec.
Oh, I'm saying when you started sneaking into clubs, did you really have any reference point as to like anybody that like? Were you listening to anything at that age? And did you have anything to really compare your dad to? I mean, when did you realize, because you said your mother played it down, when did you realize that, damn, dude, you know,
when I started
you're something
listening,
special. Yeah.
Well, I had actually started listening as a teen, and it was too delicate and sophisticated for me. Like I could hear that there was something really unique going on, but it was too much, I was drawn to fusion. I liked that rocker energy, but that was still training my ears. It's still sophisticated stuff. So I sort of got into fusion first, And that got me into a lot of guitar players who would freak out when they'd hear Lenny was my dad. Like I went to see Mike Stern here. Oh, no, it was in Edmonton, actually, at the Jazz Festival. And he was the first one to go, what, Lenny Breau? And he has a daughter here and what, And so he was sort of the first one. And I'm still a huge Mike Stern fan. That's still, I mean, I love my dad. Of course, he's my number one, alive or dead, guitar player, all that. But Mike Stern is just, whew.
Yeah.
I just wish I knew all these names.
Mike is amazing.
Boy.
No, it's
are
just
you
me.
Joking?
No, I'm not. Yeah, I'm joking. Seriously.
Well, because somebody, I don't know which podcast it is, somebody said, there's a metal guy who's not really hip to jazz. And I thought, well, that'll be an interesting. So I thought maybe that was you, but you were joking.
Well,
okay.
I don't follow a lot of jazz guys, but everybody you've named, I know. And,
good.
And it's like they're top of the line, everybody that could possibly be involved, with Chet Atkins and Steve Vai and Andy and of course Mike Stern. And it's like, wow, that's a roster in itself.
So you did you actually
really
start?
Is amazing.
Did you actually start to get into fusion before you recognized that your dad was kind of absolutely on par with these kind of guys, if not slightly different?
I did because, like I said, we never had a TV. And I still joke, I don't know if it's because we couldn't afford it or my mom was making a good choice for me. But I never watched TV, and constantly, morning till night, there was music on. And we have a great radio station here called CKUA. It's a listener-supported radio station. Oh. And they played a ton of jazz. And so that was always, so I was, my ears were being trained really young. Wow. And so by the time I was really, starting to be curious about exactly who Lenny was and what happened to him and what his innovations were, I already had pretty good ears. So.
Wow. Yeah, that's it's.
Or I like to think I had pretty good ears. I don't know.
Well, they were listening to things that were really good and special and innovative, and
yes.
Then to realize that your dad's like on par with all of this.
He's inspired a lot of those guys that I was listening to. Yeah.
Now I have to ask real quick because we interviewed Larry Coryell.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, sure.
And probably, a couple months before he passed away, I think we were one of the last, if not the last interview he ever did. Mm-hmm. Now, did you meet Larry at any time?
I did not meet Larry. I'll tell you a little bit about, what I do know about their interaction. Unfortunately, I was never able to meet him, but I can't remember who. I think it was a luthier named Tom Holmes. Yes, it was in Tennessee. He gave me some photos of Larry Coryell and my dad on stage. And they were both just beaming and smiling and just in heaven to be playing together. You can just tell when musicians are just really, impressed and comfortable with each other. And there's just this great groove going on. And so those photos are on the new official Lenny Breau site. Wow, and I don't think they've ever been shared before. And they're both just beautiful because it's the 70s. They've got all this mounds of dark hair, and Larry was really handsome.
Well, and both of them were like, they were probably the godfathers of it, right, Jeff? I mean, Larry was, from what we gathered talking to him, he was like one of the first guys. So obviously those two,
but I'm also going to get into another name here who was, I assume, kind of mentoring a little bit Lenny, and actually was in charge of some of the recordings that he did, and was also a pioneer in the kind of, in one of the styles that Lenny took and morphed into what he did. But Chet Atkins.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
It. Yeah.
Yeah, that was huge.
Yeah, that was from what I've seen, that was very huge. He saw something in Lenny immediately.
Mm-hmm. I want to say one more thing about Larry. Do you mind?
Sure.
Oh, go, please.
It's because it's so cool. So Larry recorded a duet with one of my other all-time favorite players, kind of an obscure guy. He's in New Orleans. His name's Phil Degree, and he at that time was playing a 17-string guitar that has 10 harmonic strings on the body, all Lenny inspired. Amazing instrument, amazing player, but never leaves New Orleans. I'm bringing him up here for a launch party I'm having for the site. But anyway, him and Larry Coryell recorded a tune, and I love it. It's called Lenny's from Heaven. Isn't that great?
Oh, wow.
So I had to bring that in there because it's Larry and so Phil DeGree, amazing player, a very cool guy. So, and he's in my new film, which debuted on the site. Anyway, okay, so Chet, You want to talk about Chet?
Sure. I mean, if you have any memory of that, or
I do. So I first met Chet in about 1998. I went to Nashville, and you can see it in my first film. You see us meeting for the first time in The Genius of Lenny Breau, and he just lost it. Like it was in his office downtown Nashville, and he just started bawling when he saw me. And he said, I didn't know I was going to see somebody that looked so much like him, so much like Lenny. And so it was very emotional, and I started crying, and I didn't know if we were going to get the interview, and that was the days when you traveled with a huge, expensive crew, you had 5 hotel rooms, and I was like, we're not going to get this, Oh, no. And but luckily the guys kept miking him, and, and he ended up, being okay, and we had a great interview, but it was very, very emotional. He really loved Lenny, as different as they were, and that's something I've been exploring lately, because Chet was part of the Good Old Boys Club, the Nashville, and Lenny was more of he was a bohemian. He was, not in a put on kind of way. He was a genuinely, not in touch with reality guy, in a sweet way, like in a very genuine way, and so some of that Nashville mentality, like he locked horns sometimes with guys like Chet and Jerry Reed, and as much as they all loved each other, my dad was really sympathetic to the Native American plight, and he kind of dressed, more hippie-ish, compared to those guys. He'd have the long ponytail and the wild shirts, and so it's interesting because, they all still loved each other, and there's this mutual admiration, but he really was not a good fit for that Nashville scene. But he got a lot of love and a great start from Chet for sure. And they stayed in touch over the years. And there's a funny story in my new film. A couple guitar players were in Chet's office, and he was going through old letters and files, and he found a letter from my dad. And my dad had written to him and said, Dear Chet, can I borrow $10,000? I promise to pay you back this time. and the guys asked him, did you give it to him? And Chet said, yeah. Did you get it back? No. So that's the relationship they had. Lenny was almost like a surrogate father to my dad. And he would look out for him and, pay his rent and loan him money and try to get him gigs. And like Lenny, apparently got him a session with Kenny Rogers, and my dad didn't show up.
Wow.
Which might have been because it would be super boring for him, or it might have been because he was not in good shape. Who knows, but it's just interesting. So he had these opportunities to have, some more dough and some commercial success. He was asked to tour with, who's that crooner? Oh, who's the old guy that's doing all the duets now with Lady Gaga and stuff? The old.
The singer.
Yes.
Oh God, what's his name?
Yeah, you know who I mean.
Yeah.
He's like 90 now.
Why are
we drawing a blank? He just did a documentary where he had all these people come in. Lady Gaga was one of them.
Yes, yeah. It's on the tip of my tongue.
Tony Bennett.
Yes.
There you go.
Tony Bennett. So Tony Bennett.
Everything's working.
So that's a big story in the music circles, is that Tony Bennett asked around for Lenny's number. He had heard him somewhere and wanted him to tour with them. And Lenny said, no. Like, I'm not going on the road and playing the same songs night after night. I don't care how much money it is. So he really had musical integrity. He wanted to play jazz and have the freedom that comes with that, and that was way more important than money. So that's cool. That's rare.
I need to interject here for a second.
Sure.
I've been looking up Phil DeGree, which is spelled Degruy.
Yes.
And this guitar that this guy plays is something I've never seen.
Well, wait till you hear it.
It's 7 strings. It's 7 strings that have a fan scale. So
yes,
it looks like it runs like probably 27, 28 inches, and then the high side's like 25 and a half. But then on the bottom half of this guitar, Jeff, it's the most craziest thing I've ever seen. There's another, I don't know, was it 10 strings or 12 strings? Am I correct?
I thought it was 10 on the body. I thought it was 17 total.
Oh, is it 7? Is it 17 total?
Okay. I could be wrong.
I'm just eyeballing it here, but they're like, this is the craziest instrument I've ever seen.
Are they sympathetic strings?
There's no fretboard.
Right. They just vibrate within the key that you're playing.
I take it, and it looks like they can be plucked, because the bridge runs in that kind of configuration. This is insane looking, and obviously they're in some kind of tuning because there's tuning pegs at the bottom. But I'll have to put this up on the website
listen to some of his stuff. Like try and find Lenny's from Heaven with him and Larry Coryell.
Okay,
and he's about to release a new CD, but he's the coolest guy. Like we were just in New Orleans, we just shot some interviews there, and I mean he's a comedian too. Like he is so funny. Like he did, you guys will appreciate this. He did If Lenny Studied with Jimi Hendrix, and then he started singing, "Hey bro, where are you going with those harmonics in your hand?" And then he'd play it.
That's so
like
funny.
It was just so amazing, but all spontaneous but with this amazing music accompanying every joke. Like I was just dumbfounded the whole time. He's such a rarity, and he doesn't leave New Orleans enough. He's sort of in this little comfort. He talks slow and moves slow and drinks good wine and does his regular little gigs. And so many people don't know who he is, and he's so unique and so brilliant. His style is so sophisticated and unusual.
That's a lot like our good buddy Greg Kalk, who really doesn't want to leave Wisconsin. I mean, he now he's known because of his Wildwood demonstrations of guitars for that guitar store. And
first started
tons of YouTube videos of that. But he's him and his son have a 3-piece band, and they play a lot of places in Wisconsin. But we asked him in the interview why you never, because he could have. I'm sure the offers that probably came to that guy were staggering. Yeah. But he just was like, no, I have a family and I wanted to stay close to home. I never wanted to travel that way. And the whole Wildwood thing, I think he goes out once a month for like 3 days, records a ton of videos, and they pay him for that gig, and that's it.
Wow. Right. Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah. So
there are a lot of people that are like that. We have a good friend in town here, Carl Filipiak, who could be nationally touring for decades now. And he's like,
absolutely.
Now, I like to wake up in my own bed, and if you can make a living like that and be happy.
Yeah.
Why bother with the rigors of the road,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. The novelty of that wears off pretty quick.
Very quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, all right. So where did we leave off here?
I don't know. Sorry, I'm all over the map.
No, that's fine. That's great. That's great. We love the continuing story.
Right.
So there was let me see. There was you and clubs. There was Chet Atkins. There was the 17 string.
Guitarp.
There you go. Guitarp. I like that. So. If there's anything else musically, I mean, I'm personally, the execution of his such unique style really, is awe-inspiring. Like just the way there's so much going on there. He's one of those guys where you swear there can't just be one person playing, that kind of thing. And it's like, taking flamenco-ish style and inspiration and execution and putting that into jazz or blues it's like, it was really something
different. Freight train.
Yeah, it was really something different and special. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So he would take, a simple country melody and turn it into an absolute masterpiece. So I loved what Ted Green said. He said, your dad had the refinement of a classical player, but he had, he started with that down home country with his family's band. My grandparents were RCA recording artists. And so he grew up, hearing country, good country, and he played in the family band, and then he got bored and he started exploring jazz, and he dedicated a couple of years just exclusively to flamenco, not because he wanted to be a flamenco player necessarily, but so he could apply that, use some of that stuff, draw from it, in his jazz playing. And, but and Middle Eastern stuff he loved. And so you can hear some sitaristic kind of influences sometimes. And then the technique, there's a prof at Berklee School of Music who teaches a Lenny Breau techniques class, which is fantastic. That warms my heart. These young guys learning about my dad's innovations.
Wow.
And he explains it best, how, and he said, I can't teach them everything. It would take 1,000 years, but he goes through what, the different modules and the different things that they cover in the class. And it's just brilliant. And when you hear everything he covers, you realize, how much my dad did. And he says there's still nobody doing it. He's been gone since 1984. He said there's still nobody. There's people, with the artificial harmonics, of course, that's all over the place now. And Chad actually did it first, but more of us, it was like an embellishment at the end of a tune. And Lenny sort of took it to where he could do it for 10 minutes and make it interesting. And
inside the melody and everything. Yeah.
But then it was interesting. Then another guitar instructor that I talked to, he said, the harmonics is actually one of the easier things he did. It's what people can identify with. But really deep players know that's one of the easier things he did. There's so much else going on that was so complicated and difficult,
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm just starting to hear that stuff now. Like it's taken me years, of listening and being able to be still and quiet and really listen. And then I'm still listening to his stuff going, oh my God, what was that? And stuff I've missed because there's so much going on, but it's so delicate that if you don't meet it halfway, you're going to miss it. That's,
Yeah. And did I read correctly that he was performing like Merle Travis and Chet Atkins style or songs at age 14?
Yeah, there's an album called Boy Wonder. And there's a cute story my grandma tells. Merle Travis I don't know if he traveled to their town where they lived in Maine, but Lenny, I think, was 12. And he played for Merle, and Merle said, he's better than I am. And he put his hat on Lenny's head. Yeah, he had mastered Chet stuff really young, and that's what blew all those guys away. They're like, who is this? But then he made it interesting. He did, he incorporated all this other stuff. Once he started listening to jazz, then boy, oh boy, everything just kind of exploded. And,
Now, Jeff, I guess that would be like equivalent a little bit like Danny Gatton, right? Because Danny was like, he was a different walk of life. People were constantly trying to figure out what he was doing.
Yeah,
and
he was a fusionist as well and really open.
Yeah,
he was very humble though. He was humble when I talked to him. He said, "I'm kind of I can do my one thing," but your dad was like, he was just praising Lenny. And
so you chatted with Danny Gatton too?
I did. Yeah. Oh. Unfortunately, we never met. He, another one that left us too soon. He died probably within a year after the first time I talked to him. And then I stayed in touch with his daughter for a while because she was grieving. But yeah, there's this famous blindfold test that Downbeat magazine does, and they did one with him and guitar players. And so they play you these guitar players and you have to name them. And he said, Lenny was the greatest bar none. And, this is why. And he was wonderful. And it's unfortunate that he's not here. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, like he took, for just a huge umbrella, like a chicken picking kind of style, but just took it in a different direction.
Yes.
like morphed it into jazz and blues, where Lenny took like a flamenco thing after a while and morphed that into jazz and blues. And, they both took something really different but a really recognizable type of style, and they just morphed it into, morphed everything else into it, which was just so cool. They were different, but they were the same in that aspect.
Yeah, they were the same in their musical spirit, which was, there's no boundaries.
Right.
There's no boundaries. This inspires me, so I'm going to use it in this song from a different genre, and it doesn't matter. That complete openness and not being concerned with, being labeled a rock player or a jazz player or a country player.
Right.
Although jazz happens to be the genre where you have the freedom to do it all. So I think that's why my dad was drawn to that. And also where you have sidemen who can keep up. With your flights of fancy.
Yeah, there's the key.
Right.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, it's not every guy walking down the street that wants to or owns an instrument can be in that genre.
Yeah, they might want to. They might want to be. Ain't too many can be.
No.
Well, you know what? Do you know what's blown me away? Growing up in sort of a jazz vacuum, and I talk about this in the second film, is how many of the rockers are hip to jazz and love Lenny. That blew me away because I don't know any rock history. I'm starting to learn some now, and I like some of it. I prefer the fusion because it's a little more interesting. It's got the rocker energy and then the sophisticated vocabulary. So I like that. But I'm shocked at how many of them, like Joe Satriani and like I mentioned Steve Vai before, and all those guys dig jazz. And same with the country players. When they're in between their sessions, they're sitting around listening to jazz. Like, to me, jazz is sort of the top of the mountain now that I've interviewed so many musicians from different genres, because even classical players have said to me, I wish I could relax enough to swing and to improvise. I can't.
Wow.
Yeah, that does sound right. Because everything that they do, they have to. My friend Vince, he's a trained classical guy, and he goes, "We have to memorize everything," and he goes, and it has to be played the exact same way. Everything is structured.
Yes.
There's no
right.
outside. There's no improvising. Nothing. It's here.
That's
it
right.
is. This is how you play it.
I think you're probably on the superior end of things if you actually memorize that, because most of those guys, they're staring at dots and lines from start to finish.
Yeah.
Well, the one problem is, especially with the guitar pieces, because I asked him one time, I said, "You don't read the music?" He goes, "Oh, I memorize it." He goes, "Because you can't flip it during a live performance because it ain't like a piano guy, or you can have somebody flipping it." So he said a lot of times.
Well, I guess if you're really good, if you're a classical guitar player, you can have somebody flipping those too. But,
that is true. But Evan, if you watch like Evan Tolcher, one of the guys we interviewed, he does those competitions. Remember that, Jeff? Evan Tolcher? He does competitions, and I was like, that is such a weird thing. But he,
like classical guitar competitions?
Absolutely. And these are big time. Like, from what I understand, it's like the top guys on the planet. And I
do remember that.
He's like, I said, well, that shouldn't add too much stress, because that's how he basically makes his living. And he said that, some of these pieces are just absolutely insane. And if you watch his YouTube videos, he is just going. I mean, it's like, whoa.
Wow.
So
I do remember that.
I didn't even know there was such a thing as a competition.
I didn't know either.
In classical, and that's why I remember it now when you mention it, because it's like, wow, I didn't realize that classical guitar players had like shootouts.
They have that gunfighter trait. Who knew?
Right.
Now, what I will tell you from the rocker side is that when you name these guys like Joe Satriani and Steve Vai, if you name John Petrucci and maybe a couple of the other guys that are like heavily into the they can go technical, but they can also rock out. They have they are absolutely experts, or I don't even know geniuses. I don't know, what would you call it, Jeff? Because there isn't any aspect of music that you could throw by them, as in speech or modes or any of that stuff that they don't know. Like, I've read articles where Steve Vai transcribed every bit of music that Frank Zappa ever wrote just to be in his band.
Yeah. Right.
And so then it trained him in such a way that he says most of the time when he writes his music, he never even touches the guitar. He does it through his, just writing notes out on his staff.
Hear it.
Yeah, because he can hear it. And Joe taught Steve years ago. He was his guitar teacher from down the street. And I've seen things with Joe where he's just going, okay, so this is the mode, and when you want to transition, here's the net. And it was like, this is a guy that's been talking modes for, all these years. And I think that's where, you won't see, let's see, who would it be? You won't see Angus Young in that group.
And that's okay because Angus
okay, so forgive me, he's like the Metallica guy?
No.
Who's Angus Young again?
AC/DC. But he's just a straight-ahead rock and roller.
AC/DC. See, I don't even know the difference between those guys.
His influence
They're pretty similar, aren't they?
was Chuck Berry. No, not at all. No.
Oh, they're not?
No. Okay. AC/DC is what you would call a traditional rock and roll band.
Absolutely.
It's just a lot of three-chord progressions and a lot of blues licks sped up. It's Chuck Berry music, basically. And, and of course, they've conquered the world with that. But it wouldn't be a conversation.
Not my world.
Exactly.
Sorry.
I guess when I say conquered the world, when they have
what you mean.
Yeah, when they have a concert in Prague, there's 100,000 people show up.
Right.
It's a different platform. But one person I wanted to ask you if you've interviewed or know, it would be Frank Gambale.
I know that name, but
he's an Australian fusion guy.
And I think Tommy Emmanuel, who's my friend and who I've interviewed.
Oh, nice.
I don't know if you guys are hip to him. Yeah.
Oh,
so he's Aussie. He lives in Nashville now, I think. He talked about Frank, and I really don't remember exactly what he said, but I think that's who brought his name up to me. But no, I've never actually met him or.
Frank is the guy who pretty much invented sweep picking. And economy picking, as he calls it. And he's from Australia. He's an Italian from Australia because both of his parents, right, Jeff, I think are of Italian descent.
I believe so, yeah.
And Tommy Emmanuel, we can probably safely say, will never be on this show.
Why?
Not because of Tommy, but because of his publicist lady. So she doesn't.
We've had a hard time.
She doesn't like me.
With him.
Is it Gina? Is it Gina?
It is.
Oh. I know.
What did you do, Mick?
What did you say?
Look, here's how it worked. I called. There was a number. I called this number. This young man answered the phone. He was a PR guy. He said, call this number. And it was 4th of July weekend, which happens to be right around now. And I called the number. Why she picked up while she was in the grocery store on a Saturday, I have no clue. And then she got angry with me. And I was like, you picked up the phone to a strange number. Why?
Yeah.
And then she proceeded.
You would have left a nice, kind message.
I would have totally left a nice message. And then she proceeded to tell me that we'd never be able to interview him because of when we record this show. And I went, okay, well, I know what that answer is.
I can ask Tommy if you want. He would love to do it. He loves to.
We would love.
He would love to talk to Tommy.
Yeah.
Sure.
He's honest.
I never meant to make her angry, but she was very angry. So I just went.
Well, you know, I've seen her kind of moody. Don't put that in the thing.
No, it's okay. Look, I
just have a couple of words ago to bleep out there, Mick.
It's no problem.
Yeah.
But you know, it's one of those
Tommy
things.
is totally sweet. There's a little bit of him in my new film, which I hope you guys will watch because you'll love it. I wanted to mention this, so that's
where I want to get back to now. I want to get back to the old one and why the new one, and a little bit of the story, like what you think happened. So if it's okay, we're gonna go back to Emilyville here.
Yeah.
And we're gonna find out, like, you did the last one. What was it? 1999, I believe. It was called The Genius of Lenny Breau.
So it's Emily walking through Lennyville. There's no Emilyville. It's me.
Well, there is for us.
Me retracing his path.
Nice.
which has been such an education, such a privilege. My God, I mean, life-changing stuff, so I produced the first film. I had co-producers, and it was called The Genius of Lenny Breau, or it is called The Genius of Lenny Breau. And it did really well. It won a Gemini Award, which is, kind of our, what do you call them there? Grammy. No, Grammy's the music. Anyway, you know what I mean. So it did well.
Emmy or something like that, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and that
what's
would be
the
an
TV
Emmy.
documentary? Would it be an Emmy?
Yeah, because the Tony is theater.
Tony is theater.
I think the Emmy is.
Would it be
music.
Would it be a Golden Globe? Because it was from television.
Yeah, let's maybe.
Oh, maybe.
Anyway, it's our Canadian equivalent of that. And then I traveled around to film festivals. A lot of them were in the States. So there was a great one in Miami that was super cool, and it won a film festival contest in Paris. Anyway, so it did well. And then after I produced the first film, I still was hearing more stories about my dad, and people would send me tapes. I'd find great archival footage. I mean, everybody recorded him when he came around. So I would get these treasure goodie packages in the mail and freak out. And so I realized that I wanted to go deeper into a couple aspects of his life, his innovations. So the second film is called Lenny Breau Remembered. And I started hearing from guys like Tommy Chong, who I'm like, what? And, and so we went to LA and interviewed Tommy. And I'm friends with his daughter, Ray Dawn.
Nice.
She's an actress in LA. But I was shocked to know how passionate he is about Lenny. And he's a very sophisticated music listener. I mean, he's a guitar player, but he knows a ton of jazz history. And so I just never really related to the humor that I had seen, the Cheech and Chong stuff over the years. But when I went and interviewed him, it blew me away. And you can see that in the new film. His interview is just brilliant. Then he tells me that one of their most famous skits, Dave's Not Here, and material like that is inspired by my dad. So Lenny had that, which is kind of a, it's like, is that a compliment? I don't know. but because Lenny was naturally like that. Like, it wasn't necessarily, weed inspired. He was just so deep into music and so clueless about what day it was or anything else in life, because he was mastering that instrument. And so he would be like that, like, what, who, where, what, is it Wednesday? and it wasn't because he was stoned. It's just, of course that was a part of it too at some point. But so that was a fascinating interview. So a lot of those things came to me after I produced the first film. So we did the second one, and we've broken it up into 5 chapters, which is really cool. So chapter 1 is innovation and influence. And then I think 2 is drugs. We explored that tastefully. He was an addict, unfortunately, and struggled. And then the third chapter is the murder. He was murdered, and so I went to the LAPD, and we've stimulated an investigation again, which is great. And then I think there's one on his humility. He was unusually humble. Never said a bad word about another player. Spent time with beginners. Would sit down with a beginner for 3 hours and show them something. Very generous with his time. No ego.
Wow.
And hated being called, like when Chet would say he was the greatest guitar player that ever lived. He said he hated that, And I just watched the Jocko doc, and he loved it. He would tell people, I'm the greatest bass player. It was just interesting, like the polar opposite of Lenny. And I know. And then the last one is stories, really funny, sweet stories, because he really was a sweet, funny guy. So that's on the new official site. I hired a great company here in Calgary to do an official. I put some big money into it because I wanted a beautiful site, so it looks like it could be something for the Stones or something.
Awesome.
It kind of broke my heart because it's jazz guitar, and a lot of times he was too unreliable to book, or things weren't properly promoted, or he didn't show up for the cover shoot because he was hungover. So nothing was ever really well put together. There was no fitting representation of him. So I really wanted a beautiful site. So you can go there. There's a great bio. So you can, buy music, watch the films. There's a beautiful gallery of rare stills. And so I'm quite proud of it.
Yeah, I'm on there right now. It's pretty cool.
That's really awesome.
A lot of HTML5, man. That thing is crazy. Phew.
Wow. Yeah. I was watching some film, quite possibly part of your first documentary. I can't be sure, but he's being interviewed in a hotel room in Nashville.
That was from a documentary called One More Take that was done in the 60s.
Okay. Was that 60s or early 70s? I don't know what 60s. It was. Was it 60s?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that time for me is such a cool, nostalgic time, and it was just so great to see him sitting there and being interviewed and him explaining things. And I thought that was just freaking awesome, just to see him.
That was. He was there
about what he does.
Yeah. That I agree. That was fantastic stuff. He was there with the original Lenny Breau trio. So his buddies, his sidemen from Winnipeg, and Chet recorded them. And there's a lot of funny stories around that, like Chet saying, Lenny, can you play a lot of melody and make the song a little shorter for radio play? And then the next take would be like 13 minutes. Like he couldn't control it.
I cut 30 seconds out of it. Come on.
That's right. But like once he got into it, it was a process. It wasn't like, I want a tune that will work on the radio. It was just this really beautiful process, And
I did see part of that, the recording sessions. I'm assuming they were RCA recording sessions, and Chet was there.
Yes.
He was, I guess, producing.
Yes.
And somebody asked Chet about the sessions and everything. He says, "Well, yeah, we'll cut the tape where we have to."
Yeah.
Because you got to make a 3-minute, 30-second song,
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just the nostalgia of watching all that. It was really heartwarming for me to see that. And
nice.
Man, I just wish I could have met the guy. It's just his style is so unique and technically awesome, but just beautiful to listen to at the same time.
Now I want to throw some more names out.
On.
Yeah, he did.
Sure.
Okay, so Scott Henderson, have you chatted with him?
No, I haven't.
Okay,
no, and I'm a fan of Scott's, but no, I haven't.
Okay, and what about when he was around, Alan Holdsworth? Did you ever talk to him?
No, I never did that either. I've talked to so many people, and you're picking all the ones I haven't. No, I haven't.
I mean, I had the pleasure of seeing both of them, Scott and Alan.
Wow.
And Alan was like, I was like, there's so many notes going on here. I was having a hard time processing them because of just the sheer veracity this guy had. I mean, it was amazing to sit there and watch this guy go on. And then he goes, yeah, I'm not feeling well tonight. I have a cold. I was like, holy crap.
Sorry, only 3 fingers are working tonight.
Yeah, that's funny.
And then Scott Henderson, he was just, it wasn't Tribal Tech. It was just Scott. And then he had, the other 2 guys that were with him. I don't know who they were, but I was like, my God, I just couldn't even believe, because I had picked up his Dog Party album, which was all blues, where he didn't play a jazz lick on it. And I was like, but I knew about his fusion stuff from MIT. Because he was like an instructor there, or GIT, sorry.
Yeah.
Musicians Institute, but it was GIT. And he was like, he is. He's just a monster on the guitar, man. And when I went to see him, my friend Dennis, who was with me, he was like, this guy's amazing. And I said, I know he can, do some stuff, but I was like, holy crap. I just couldn't even.
Yeah.
And that's, Jeff, that's when I got to see one of the Bob Bradshaw Sir-made amplifiers. One of the... What is it called? Custom Audio Electronics, right?
Right.
Yeah.
CAE, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And was like, man, that was, it was pretty impressive. But, yeah, to see Alan Holdsworth that was one of those things I was glad I got to do in my day.
I bet. Yeah.
Now, speaking of gear, I have a question about that, a real quick one.
Sure.
And then I do want to get back into the cause of death a little bit. But
Sure.
Was your dad formally trained at all?
No.
Do you know?
No, nor formal training, but taught master classes.
Well, there you go. Wow.
Well, you know what? I said this to a writer friend of mine, Bill Milkowski. He wrote the Jocko biography. Great music. I don't know if he's a critic, but musicologist type dude. And we were talking about the guys who started in musical families. So Tommy Emmanuel, my dad, Jocko, the session player in Nashville that has worked the most, I think they're Brent Mason. They all started in their folks country band or music, the musical band, not necessarily country, because no, that wouldn't have been Jocko, wasn't country. But while the wires were still connecting while they were kids, Wow. And so, yeah, I've just kind of made that connection as I've been going through and talking to these guys that they seem to have a bit of advantage if they're hearing music when they're 3 in the house, live music. And, I can't remember what your question was, though. Sorry.
No, it was going to go from there to gear, because I was going to go into
gear, right?
Into the gear thing.
How did I get to that from gear? Sorry.
Well, no, I asked you if he was formally trained.
Oh, right. So no, he was not.
Okay.
So he just heard great music. Like my grandma in her prime had like a Patsy Cline kind of range, and she was a yodeler, and like I said, they were RCA recording artists. Mm-hmm. And so he grew up hearing some really good music and playing in the family band. And I think these kids learn pretty early on about parental approval, or getting praised by your showman dad. If I kick butt on the bandstand, he's going to pat me on the head, and I'll get to hang out with him more. And I think that's the message that.
Or I get ice cream when we're finished,
Yeah.
Well, the best.
And Lenny was a.
I was just going to say, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the best answer would have been is, and you can use this for future interviews, is just Mel Bay books only. That's all you ever learned on.
He could have written books. He could have taught Mel Bay.
You know what I'm saying, though, right, Jeff?
Sure.
Just throw this giant hook at everybody.
Right.
No, he was self-taught, Mel Bay.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because there's an LA rocker guy. I don't know if you guys have heard of Ed Supple, and he was one of the guys who would go in and do the sessions when the big rocker guys didn't make it in, and then sometimes they couldn't do his solos when they'd go on the road. And I can't say who, but anyway, so he made a joke. Does it rhyme
with Mick Mars? No, I'm just kidding.
So he told me, he said, the first time I saw your dad on TV, he said, I was in the States, but we got some Canadian television. He said, I realized the guy I'm paying $2 a week with the Mel Bay book has no clue. Like it just reminded me when you said Mel Bay. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
See, the secret's out.
So that's Ed Supple. Yeah.
My guitar teacher could play the Mel Bay book backwards and forwards. Yeah, great.
There
great.
you go.
Right.
There you go. Yeah. So no formal training. And then when he was doing the CBC TV shows, he had to learn to read a little because there was a time limit, when you're in a studio. And but he always said I had such a great ear. If I heard the part once, I would memorize it and be okay either way. But yeah, so yeah, no formal training, just lots of listening and tons of practice. I mean, obsessive practicing. I
would imagine so.
Yeah.
Just taking the time to meld those styles together, that doesn't happen in 5 minutes. You really have to.
No.
You have to know what you want to do and then figure out how to execute it. And that was the beautiful thing about it. He just put everything together. But gear for a minute. We'll see if do you remember anything about his gear? Do you have any of it? Does anybody have any of it? Was there anything special?
Well, I have one guitar here that was one of his Tom Holmes guitars.
Oh, okay.
So Tom's a luthier. And Tom's interesting. I think Tom's he does pickups now primarily, but I think he only made guitars for Bo Diddley. Who's the ZZ Top guy?
Billy Gibbons.
Billy Gibbons.
Yeah, him and Lenny. And yeah, I'm sorry, I know all the jazz guys. I can tell you all Miles's guitar players, but I don't know the ZZ Top. So he made one guitar that ended up, it was a interesting story. The woman who my dad was married to, who's the prime suspect in his murder, had gotten rid of all of his guitars, promptly pawned them shortly after he died. Ooh. But she kept this one, and she brought it. This is kind of a cool story. She brought it to Nashville and called up one of my dad's friends. And by this time, everybody viewed her as guilty. She had been a textbook abuser. And so anyway, she called up this guitar player who's now passed away, Terry Whiting, and said she was in town and she, was thinking she might get more for the guitar if she was in Nashville, where Lenny had this cult following. And so Terry was conniving, but bless his heart, and said, well, where are you staying? I'd like to meet you for coffee. Long story short, he meets her for coffee, excuses himself, goes to her motel where this guitar was, kicks in the door and steals it and puts it in his trunk. And anyway, it's made its way back to me. So he acted shocked with her when they went back to the room and it was gone, and stood there, and he said, well, he was my guitar hero. He was the reason why I played, and she was horrible to him, if not took his life. And I didn't want her to just sell this guitar. So anyway, when he passed away, his girlfriend got in touch with me. And she was in Chicago, just outside Chicago by this time. So my business partner and I, just a few months ago, flew to Chicago and retrieved this guitar that had, gone from my dad's hands to this crazy woman's hands to Terry Whiting's hands, and then to Chicago from Nashville. Anyway, so I have it, which is great. It needs a little TLC. But, what
an awesome story.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Okay. So this obviously, because I started watching the first documentary online.
Okay.
And
cool.
Genius of.
Yes, and but I didn't get that far in to hear the whole story of what, because they never found, nobody was ever found guilty, right? It was like a cold case, right?
And it's a cold case. In '84, they didn't have the advances that they do now in forensic science, and we've discovered now there were several mistakes made at the crime scene, and sadly they sort of wrote my dad off as an addict in an abusive situation, and they were like, what is there, a murder every 6 seconds in LA? So it didn't get enough attention. Yeah. And so once I was strong enough and, sort of in a place mentally where I could do it, I reached out to the detectives. And so I'm in regular communication with them, and they had no idea, who he was or the stories that I've heard in 6 different cities in North America. The same stories echoed of this woman hunting my dad down and physically abusing him, and he wouldn't even defend himself because he was so worried about his hands and his nails. And so, and she was bigger than him and crazy. And he tried, there was a couple of restraining orders. He tried to get away from her, and she just would not give up. And, I've done a lot of reading about it, and this is very typical when an abuser is losing their power. They'd rather keep you dead than let you go. Sure. So that's unfortunately what happened. And so the good thing is there's these new cold case file detectives, and I'm in regular contact, and I was able to share the murder track that's on the site. That's one of the chapters I talked about, and it's very powerful because it's musicians saying, Lenny was in the studio and she showed up and threw him up against the wall, and they had never heard that stuff. They didn't have access to it. So I was able to sort of hand deliver them a bunch of new evidence. Now
who this person? Because forgive me, like I said, I have not seen this part of it. She was in a relationship with him at some point, or
they were married. Yeah. She was. I don't know. Apparently, was a great author that wrote a book called One Long Tune, a biography on my dad. And he learned that she was an Elvis groupie for a long time. And she was just sort of like whoever she could get her claws into to try and make it. She was a mediocre singer. So she was hanging around Chet for a while, and then Chet sort of pawned her off on Lenny. And he said he regretted that. He felt so guilty. So he was the one who introduced. Wow. Oh, he felt horrible about it. He told me.
Well, it was safe to say she was a narcissist, because that's the patterns that you talk about. That's usually what that's it.
Yes.
I mean, that's textbook stuff. You know, the physical abuse, and then of course once it gets to a point where they feel like they're losing control. You know, and especially if it's a violent narcissist, then you have that, and that's crazy stuff, man.
And it just breaks my heart to think of what he endured, because he really was. I mean, there's some guys that are jerks. I mean, they're great musicians, but they're jerks. But Lenny, honestly, everybody I talked to says he wouldn't hurt a fly. He was so sweet, and he was a small guy. But you know, Burton Cummings told me that. And he was Bachman Turner Overdrive, or Guess Who. Or anyway, he said he saw Lenny in Winnipeg, where they have brutal winters, and he was falling on the ice. It was slippery, and he didn't break his own fall. Like he just fell, you know. So I mean, that
he just wanted to protect his hands.
He wanted to. He said his hands stayed in his pockets.
Probably a little bit of a pacifist too, you know, that would never want to hurt anybody.
Yeah.
And then shame. When you're an addict, you deal with shame.
Oh, tons of it.
And so she would exploit that, you know. And so it's really heartbreaking for me to, you know. So hopefully justice will be served, although she's a crazy old lady and she's in Stockton. That's punishment enough.
I was gonna say, is she still alive? But you just answered that.
Yeah. Well, it's
she
like B.B. King. B.B. King's, you know, that woman that he was with. They said that she was his kids. I think were saying that she was, you know, keeping you know, away from everybody, and he like needed treatment because he was such a diabetic, and she was like,
that was a terrible story.
Yeah.
I think her, and I think management. I think
something was really shady with that story, and it never really made, you know.
Oh, that's awful. I didn't know that.
Yeah, you know, people get, you know, we all know this, but when it comes to things like that, people like to. You know, when there's like a, you know, if there's a sum of money, or if there's some things that could be beneficial to them, they can be, you know, just crazy, man.
Yeah.
That's
well, she knew he had this big reputation, but then he didn't deliver on the dough side, though. You know, so she wanted to be around him because everybody go, oh my God, he's the greatest guitar player, and you know, and she liked that, but that only goes so far if you don't.
Well, she picked the wrong music. See. Those guys are the best musicians on the planet, but they're also the poorest.
Right. Yeah, pick somebody, like you said, go back to being like, you said he was like just a bohemian, like a real lived life like a bohemian.
Yeah.
And
not
you know,
like the facade that people put on now of being non-mainstream, but like really genuinely not concerned with, like he never had a driver's license, and you know, he had to get people to cash checks for him because he never had a bank account, and you know, and it wasn't that he was being irresponsible. He just, those things were just
didn't matter.
Yeah.
No. Not at all.
Well, you know, I also think that probably because of the level of just, you know, the genius level that it takes to be in that, you know, it's not 10,000 hours, it's 20,000 hours, right? And most people can't even comprehend that. So when you're at that level, I think it's more like almost savant-like, right? So
and the fact that the brain is pretty consumed on what you do, and just the periphery stuff just doesn't matter. Yeah, it's the Paul Gilbert not knowing that you could set the gas pump thing. You know what I mean? Like funny. That's one of the stories that I hear that and I go, everybody knows that. But he didn't know that. He didn't know that you could just put the gas pump in the car and click a thing and it would go. He thought it was the car.
Right. Yeah, that's hilarious.
But,
well, and you'll see a lot of stories like that if you watch these films, particularly the second one. A lot of guitar players talk about those stories, you know, having to sort of almost childlike, like, pick him up and drive him to gigs. Nobody cared because they were rewarded with this brilliant musician sitting on their couch playing.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And he was so sweet and lovable that everybody just wanted to hug him and protect him. And so there's a lot of stories like that. Like, he would forget where he lived. There's a funny story. A neighbor said he knocked on their door. He was knocking on doors and like, I just moved in. Do you know where I live? Because he forgot. He went to the gig and came home and forgot which place it was his. It's pretty funny.
I forgot where I parked my house.
Yeah, exactly. That's hilarious.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's okay. So the website is LennyBreau.com, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. LennyBreau.com, and it's the official site, and that's okay. And we're really, it's a really big deal because there's been a lot of people that have released material and stuff without talking to the kids, Lenny's kids, and so this is something that's us. This is the first thing that's totally us, and there's some recordings. For a long time, Randy Bachman had a bunch of the recordings. We've rectified that, and we have a deal directly with the distributor ourselves now.
Okay.
Oh, nice.
So there's it feels nice.
Correct me if I'm wrong. The film is out, or you're in this? Okay. Good.
Yeah. So the Genius of Lenny Breau has been remastered.
Okay.
So you can buy or rent that on the site. And then the new film is called Lenny Breau Remembered. And that's comprised of outtakes from the first film, a bunch of new interviews, some new footage. Well, it's archival footage, new old footage, and rare recordings. Yeah, really, really beautiful stuff. Very gritty. It's not slick looking. It's not overproduced looking like we had, time-coded, crappy quality stuff. But because the content is so strong, nobody cares. And then there might be something that's perfectly lit and crisp and beautiful that was shot just a couple years ago. I had Tom Bresch, who's Merle Travis's son, was my shooter for a lot of stuff, and he's a thumb picker.
Nice. There you go.
And so, it was just a great vibe because it was a guitar player who was a shooter. Yeah, it worked out really well.
Well, documentaries have taken on a whole new world. It used to be, kind of that gritty, grainy thing going on, and now they are, top quality movie type stuff. But to see this, this footage is not, it's not new footage because it's, from when he was alive. Mm-hmm. So you're going to see some of that.
It's not new, but it's real.
And that's what you want.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and then some of it has never been seen before. So, like I've heard from, maybe a teacher from a music school who says, I've been saving these tapes. Your dad came in and taught a master class, and I videotaped it, and I wanted to give it to you at the right time. So I'm still getting new video footage and new recordings, and which is amazing all these years after he's been gone. Yeah.
That's pretty wild.
So,
that must be pretty special to see. For you especially.
It's like treasures. Those are my treasures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Wow.
All right. Well, look, that website link is going to be on this show, and that will live in
perpetuity.
That's right. So you guys can go out there.
Wonderful.
You can check it out, and definitely, look, these things, I know for a fact, these things take a ton of time to put together. It takes people and money to be able to make one of these things. It's not an easy task. You know, not knowing, I know for me, not knowing what to do, it's very difficult. It's like you got to kind of learn as you go. And, and the other part of it is, too, is that you got to tell a story. It's a labor
of love, for sure.
Yeah. And you got to tell this story.
Oh, it's a labor of love. Yeah, it's a labor of love. I put a lot of my own dough in. And then I had an investor who was just really passionate about Lenny's story come on board. And like in the world of do-it-yourself websites, I wanted, but so like, for example, the discography is so complete and nobody's ever brought everything together. He sat in on so many other people's recordings.
Wow.
And so we have all the music in one place and beautiful rare photos in the gallery and film, So it's been really well received.
Yeah. Well,
Excellent,
it's an awesome looking website. I can tell you that. I was like, man, somebody put some real time into that.
Took a lot of work. Yeah, it was a lot of work.
Nice.
Way above what I know, Jeff.
And way above what I know. I just hired the right people to help.
Well, there you go.
Yeah,
you
so
go.
definitely go out and check that out. And then, we got to, I don't know, will we ever be able to meet you? That would be kind of cool if you were out here.
That would be fun, yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, I plan to do some NAMM show type stuff again.
Oh, well, there you go.
Down the road. So maybe it's something like that. And there's somebody contacted me about some guitar summit thing. I don't remember. I can't remember even where it is. It's somewhere in the States, though. And they want to feature my dad.
Texas, maybe?
Wow.
Do a thing. Might have been, maybe Texas.
Might
I'll
be
have to look.
Texas is a big
Dallas
show.
guitar show thing?
Yeah, could be. Could be.
It might
Oh,
be
it
one
might
of
be
them.
there then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Emily, if you would be so kind and remember to let us know of anything like that, and we may happen to be in the same place.
Absolutely, yeah.
So where are you guys? Baltimore?
Yes.
Just outside of Baltimore, yes.
Oh, cool.
So if we throw
I've
a
never
rock
been there.
really hard, we still won't hit where you live, but
Oh yeah. Do you are you guys familiar with Calgary? Have you been here at all?
Have not.
I've never been in Canada.
Wow.
I've been close. I've just never. I may have flown over it. I don't know.
Well, I have. But Lenny was American born, so I'm just in the process of applying for my dual citizenship for estate business reasons.
Okay.
He was born in the state of Maine.
Right.
well, there you
He was
go.
kind of like an adopted Canadian. Like he's in our Canadian Hall of Fame, and I just didn't
As
have
well
the
he
heart
should be.
Yeah, I didn't have the heart to say, well, he's technically not Canadian. I just thought, well, we'll take it. We'll take it.
Well, when he was well known and famous, he was Canadian. So
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
That's right.
He was an adopted Canadian, really,
Absolutely.
And I'm grateful to be here. Let me tell you, when I watch your news.
Yeah, you should be.
It's a little boring here. Like, it's not the cultural center of the world where I live in Calgary, but I travel enough. Like, I try to get to New York and LA as much as I can and get my music fix, my live music fix, and
Nice.
and I listen to a lot of great stuff at home.
Well, the worst thing that ever happens in Canada is when you guys win the Stanley Cup, there's a town that burns, but that's about it.
That's hilarious.
Oh,
We have that on a Wednesday.
Yeah, well, that's
Exactly. I'm a horrible Canadian. I don't even follow hockey. I'm just like this weirdo in the city. I think I'm the only one in the whole city who has no idea when we're in the playoffs or.
you have more important things to follow,
I
like
was gonna
jazz
say,
and fusion.
there you go.
Right. That's
and
right.
your dad's legacy. So
That's right. That's
wow,
right.
Emily, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah,
really.
it was fun. I mean, I hope it was okay. I feel like I'm rambling because I've had tons of coffee today.
No,
So I hope
it's okay.
I hope that you guys can edit this into something really
coffee,
great.
The coffee did us well.
Okay, good.
Your coffee did us well. No,
Okay,
it's great.
perfect.
It's great. Thank you so
Okay.
very much again. And
Okay,
man,
if you need
looking at some of
anything
that,
else, let me know.
looking at some of that footage, I really wish I could have met your dad. I really did. Such an amazing player.
It'd have been cool
And
to have
I'm
him on
sure
this
he was
show.
as an amazing person. So
Yeah.
keep up the good work.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
And there you have the story of the story.
How about that?
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah. He, I always knew the name, knew of him, knew the name, and knew that he was something special. And then we started, prepping and getting ready for this interview, and it's like, wow, man, the good die young.
Yeah, and I like I said, I started watching the first one a little bit, but it was like I'm busy, people. Anyway, so I was doing it at work, believe it or not. I hope nobody at work's listening to this. And and I was just kind of listening, and I could hear there was just tons of testimony about guys, because that's how it usually starts off with documentaries. The testimonies about how the guy did this, he did this, and it was like he was one of those guys.
Yeah,
that we don't get many of those guys on this planet that become even a name.
Right, and he didn't die as early as say like Hendrix or anybody that died at what was the magic age, 27. He was 43, but still to leave the mark that he left at 43
Yeah.
And he wasn't a rock or a blues guy. He was the guy that had this very evolved style and commingled styles into what was his own. And just really such a unique player.
I think
such a unique player.
I think one of the sad things is, and music is such a, I don't know. There is so many unforgiving sides of music that I kind of. It makes me sad. Now, I don't know how certain people feel, but it's like it's such a luck of the draw, right? Where you are at whatever time, that whatever you're in is going to either be successful or not. And sheer talent. See, because I look at it like this, right? Like if you're like an incredible football player, somebody's going to find you because, New England is they got hundreds of guys that are just scouring the country to find the next guy that's going to replace Tom Brady. Let's just use that as the example, right? And they will seek you out. Musicians, it's a whole nother world. There's, back in the day, you had to somehow get your stuff in front of a guy that would come see your band. And then they made a determination of whether you were good enough for their record company. Meanwhile, you got Danny Gatton's and Lenny's, that are just pining away and trying to become, trying to take this art that their whole life has been dedicated to. And these guys, are living as paupers. It's so weird how music, which takes so much talent, gets so little notoriety for guys that have a ton of it if they're not discovered. You know what I mean? It's a really weird avenue. And then on top of it, there was this guy that invented this app called Napster that took that avenue away from a ton of people.
Stole from all the talent. Yeah.
And today we don't have record companies. There are companies, but they're more like distributors now, and everything is left up to the musician. And it's like, holy crap, there are tons of guys out there that are great that we will never hear of.
Right. It's either that or it's where is the next person that we can mold into being just like the person that we just made money on. I mean,
exactly.
There's independent and there's
a
carbon
factory.
Copies.
Yeah, it's like a
just
factory.
A factory. Where somebody like, back in the day when in Lenny's time, Chet recognized this wonderful talent.
Yeah.
And wanted to record him because he was a huge talent and not like many other things out there style wise. So, okay, this guy's unique. Let's record him. Let's turn the public onto this guy in a way that he should be heard and try to make them understand that you should enjoy this because it's special and it's different. And there was a whole different marketing mindset back then.
Sure.
It's like, let's make the people understand how good this guy is. Yeah. And that's how everybody made their money back then. Now it's like, okay, well, you just sound like the last guy. Okay, well, the last guy or the last girl made money. So, okay, we're going to pimp you up and you're going to make money too. It's like, it's so freaking different. And if it's not that, then you're totally on your own. Ain't nobody going to come banging on your door.
Oh, no. And let me tell you, Mr. Edward Van Halen, we got to give him the praise because a lot of people would have never heard of Alan Holdsworth if it wasn't for Eddie, because Eddie saved that guy's life pretty much back in the 70s, or actually the 80s, because Alan was in such bad shape, he was selling all of his guitars to make his rent. And Eddie lent a helping hand, got him some recording stuff, where he could get some stuff on, and put his name in articles that actually started drawing people to him. And, I guess subsequently kept his career going for 20 some plus years. And that was a very cool thing, sort of like how Chet was, he was like, hey, this guy needs to be seen.
Right.
This is not something that we need to keep under covers. and this guy needs to be, walking around the streets of Ontario freezing.
Right, or I'm going to make sure nobody hears about this guy because he's better than me.
Exactly.
He does this thing better than me.
And
let's put it out there. Let's all benefit from it.
That's where I always get into this whole battling thing. I don't like it because embrace each other, man. It
shouldn't be a competition. Right.
Hell
right.
No. This is a big world.
Hug each other. Don't fight each other. Right.
Exactly.
I hear you.
It's a giant planet, believe it or not. You would think we're all jammed on top of each other, and that's just from our own problem. But there's plenty of room for all of us. So with this music thing, and we should we should be definitely turning each other on to the new stuff. It's sort of like what we tell you with this podcast. We rely on you guys to tell your friends, so that way, hopefully, we can keep it going from getting more people listening.
Absolutely. You said.
Yeah.
I don't know. On that note.
I ramble too. So, so until next time, my friend.
Right, when we may bring somebody new to your attention, like the record companies.
I hope so, yeah. Right. I'm Mick Marcelino.
That's right, and I'm still Jeff Bober.
That's right, and we're always saying,
onward.
Be sure and follow the show on Twitter @AmpsandAxes. Also, make sure you like the show on Facebook. For news, comments, and everything else, visit the webpage ampsandaxescast.com. Thanks for listening.